Hello, college football fans. It's that time again. It's time for Urban's Take with Urban Meyer, three-time national championship winning coach. Urban Meyer, welcome back again to your show, Urban's Take.
Great to be here, Tim.
Let's just jump right into it, man. I wanted to hit this with you before we move on to some bigger, maybe more important items. I think Fox Big Noon Kickoff is in Cincinnati this week. Oklahoma's coming to town for a Big 12 matchup. You played for Cincinnati way back in the early 80s, way back when you were a youngster. Did you ever see this day coming, that Oklahoma would be coming to town for a conference game, even though it's only going to be 1 year of that happening? But college football is crazy right now, isn't it, in a format standpoint?
It is, and I think it's great for Cincinnati. That they've had some really good coaches when you think about it through their time. They had Mark D'Antonio, they had Butch Jones, who had great success, Brian Kelly, and then obviously our own Luke Fickell, who, without that transition of success from those coaching staffs over and over and over again, they're not in the Big 12. So that's and they built up facilities. They've done a very good job. So it's great to be able to go back. It's actually my home, where I grew up for about 4 or 5 years, and it's going to be, Oklahoma coming to Cincinnati. It's great.
Yeah, but man, you're home away from home now is Boulder, Colorado. I think you guys are going back out there next week when Coach Prime and the Buffaloes welcome USC to town. Obviously, they're playing at Oregon this week. First time y'all haven't been on that train since the season started, to a certain extent. But I don't know. What's just your take? What's just your take right now of what you've witnessed the first 3 weeks?
Well, we're the Coach Prime Network. I went out and watched them practice. I've known them a long time. And, everybody keeps, I hate to say this because it's real, that when you're playing well, people want to see you fail. And I felt that when I had to go to Chicago for the Big Ten Network after the game. I fell asleep. I woke up and I'm watching this game. They're down by 2 scores. They come back and win. So a team always gets measured by how you handle adversity, not how you do well when things are going well. And they got two coming up that are huge. I mean, at Oregon is going to be a tough game for them. And then USC, who's a college football playoff contender and a Heisman Trophy candidate, coming to Boulder. So we'll be there. But it's fascinating. It's one of the great stories in the last decade of college football. It's going to change the way athletic directors approach a new hire. It's going to change the way coaches change teams. They simply remove people from their teams, which I'm not sure I'm a big fan of that, but I get it. Who doesn't want to do that? But the way he's done it has been phenomenal. But here's the thing: they've already handled adversity right in their face. They played a lesser team, Colorado State. They were a 2 or 3 touchdown favorite, but their best player, Travis Hunter, got hurt. They were down by 2 scores, and Deion Sanders sends them on a 98-yard drive to win the game. So far they've handled adversity. I talked to Deion the other day, and I just told him the best thing about, obviously very good players, he has hired an excellent staff. I mean, the time or how he put that staff together, because I went to meetings and watched it. That's an excellent staff, and it was one of the best college football practices I ever seen when I was out there.
Well, you got to say this too, man. Sean Lewis, he sits there. I don't even think he has a clipboard. Maybe I'm wrong, but he calls these plays. The former head coach at Kent State calls these plays, but it just seems like an endless repertoire of plays. Just when they need them and stuff. And he's been as impressive as Coach Prime, in my opinion. I mean, all those guys have been impressive, but it is interesting what he's got going on there offensively, right?
Yeah, and it's a perfect marriage, and I talked on Big Noon. We did one of our playbooks on this, that so often you can hear about a quarterback that maybe has a bad career, and it's really not the player. The player's caught in the wrong system.
Yeah.
And we had Dwayne Haskins, and we had J.T. Barrett and Cardell, and those are 3 extremely different quarterbacks. And I thought our coaching staff, we adapted the offense to that player.
Yeah.
J.T. Barrett was an RPO guy. Dwayne Haskins was more of a drop back passer. Cardell was not a runner. He was, he did scramble well, but so we adapted the offense. And it was hard. I mean, because I like to run the quarterback on third and short. You're not going to do that with Dwayne Haskins and Cardell, so you have to find different ways to do it. So I think Shedeur Sanders is the perfect RPO quarterback for Sean Lewis's system, and I'm really into this. I really appreciate that coach because I've talked to him quite a bit now. He's a head coach in waiting. I don't know if it's at CU, but he is. He won at Kent State. He can't win at Kent State.
Yeah.
He won at Kent State, and he's doing what he did. So I think he's one of the top guys in the country, and certainly on a short list of many ADs.
I told you real quick before we move on. I was impressed that Coach Prime. You know what I mean? That just shows you the depth of what this guy's got going on. This isn't some guy putting on a reality TV show. I mean, this guy has put together a staff, a football team in short order that can play with people, and you touched on it, and I think it kind of showed up on Saturday night that, boy, but they may be 2 or 3 major injuries away from, really, really having to struggle because it's interesting. That's why I wanted to ask you, will they still be undefeated when they play USC next week? What's your take on the Oregon? This is their first true test.
Yeah, this will be a tough go, but I have colleagues. Obviously, I talk to still a lot of friends. I'll get a text message or a call and say, "What is that mess out there?" All the chanting and all the sunglasses and all the gold chains and all the Little Wayne or whatever that and Gronk and all this stuff going on. And I'm like, guys, listen, I get it. At times it looks different, but behind the scenes now, he's a football coach, and that's a football team, and they're good.
Yeah.
And how I feel about toughness.
Yeah.
Is toughness. The great thing about this game, you can maybe make it look a little different, called the spread offense. You can make it look a little different with the sunglasses or whatever it is. But at the end of the day, if you go out and practice on a Tuesday, Wednesday, and you bloody your nose and you're tough and you know how to fight through stuff, you're going to win games, and that's what they're doing. So don't get confused by some of the stuff you see. Because behind the scenes, he's a excellent football coach, and he's got a great staff. He's got good players, and they're tough.
Well, you didn't answer my question, though. That's the way Coach Tressel used to answer questions.
Oh, will they win next week?
Yeah. Will they still be undefeated when they host USC next week?
I don't think they will. I think this is be a tough go for them. It's on the road. They're without Travis Hunter. But I'm looking at this team to, they'll be bowl eligible. They'll win enough games.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I mean, looking at the long haul, that's exactly right. Real quick before we move on, they hit number 11, put on Travis Hunter. If you're standing there and you're the head coach and it happens in front of you, how do you contain your emotions? I mean, that was brutal. I think you know what I'm talking about. The overthrow was pretty clear. What should have happened there?
It was a chippy game, and I saw throughout the course of the game all kinds of stuff was happening, and then Shedeur Sanders got in the face of the guy, and so you just try to number one, you care about that player. Number two is you can't. This is a long season. You get in a fight, you're out the next week too. So I've been in those situations, and you just start. You and your staff are trained to contain that moment right now. You can't go after that player. Afterwards you might, but I'll tell you what, Coach Sanders really, he put out a statement, and I just admire the guy, man. He did. There would have been a part of me saying, what the hell was that? But he did it. The kid's a good player that did it. You don't know what was in his intention or what was in his heart. But it was a cheap shot.
Yeah.
But you gotta you gotta let the officiating handle it, and you got to contain your players because it's a long season.
Yeah, granted. Speaking of long seasons, it seems like it's been forever leading up to this week. This is one of the great weeks in college football this year from a schedule standpoint. And the marquee game, Ohio State at Notre Dame for just the third time in history. I know I keep bringing you up as being this fellow who pops up in historical references, but the last time Ohio State went to Notre Dame, I think you were an assistant coach at Notre Dame for the great Lou Holtz. Put this meeting in perspective. Literally, Urban, from where I'm sitting right now, I can be at Notre Dame's football facility in 4 hours and not speed. why have these? Is it a crime a little bit that these teams? This will just be the sixth regular season meeting. Obviously, they played twice in the Fiesta Bowl. One of those that you coached for Ohio State and won that game way back in 2015. But is it a little bit of a crime against against major college football that these teams are only meeting for the sixth time in regular season?
I think it is. And when I was at Notre Dame, I remember because our schedule was brutal.
Yeah.
And I remember asking that conversation saying, how do you decide who to play? And they say, okay, historically, you play the best teams from out west, you play the down south, southwest, east, and the Midwest. So you look historically who they played. They played, I remember one time they were talking about playing a Mid-America school, and the administration and the alumni said, there's no way we'll do that. We're never going to play a lesser opponent. We're Notre Dame. Now you look at their schedule like, wait a minute, they're playing all kinds of teams. They're playing Tennessee State the other day.
Yeah.
That would have never ever happened. And then the other thing is, you look, now you're in a 12-game playoff starting next year, and I think these games are going to go away, and I'm scared about that. They should play. Look at the team up in Ann Arbor. That schedule, that you shouldn't be allowed to play that schedule.
Yeah.
Georgia's playing a schedule, and that. And at the end of the day, you're supposed to be penalized for that. They're not. So why would Ohio State play this game? Well, because it's the right thing to do. It's for the fans. It's for the good of the game. It's for everybody. But what if they lose?
Yeah.
They might be out of the playoff because they made that decision.
Yeah.
You saw Oregon do that a couple of years ago. Oregon lost, I think, 1 or 2 games. They played Auburn in the South somewhere. And I was on Atlanta. I remember discussing that at Big Noon, and they got left out of the playoff. And then you had other teams playing 3 much lesser opponents that made the playoffs. So I'm really disappointed when and there's you're talking about the Wolverines used to play Notre Dame all the time. They're not, and you know why? You can say whatever you want because they don't want to be the potential of that loss and hurt them for a playoff.
Yeah. With the Big Ten going to 18 teams here pretty soon next year, I have obviously, several of Notre Dame's longtime rivals or could have been rivals are in the Big Ten now. I'm going to ask you one more time. I've asked you this many times. Is Notre Dame going to end up in a conference eventually? What's your take on that?
I keep thinking they are, but then I think it's all success related. If they slip, they have to. I was worried that, all of a sudden Notre Dame, because they've had a couple bad years, and I would always say, okay, this is it. They got to go to the Big Ten. This is it. They got to go to the ACC. The Big Ten's a natural fit. I mean, what are we talking about? They should be in the Big Ten conference or independent. But ACC makes no sense whatsoever. But the Big Ten, they're right there. Can you imagine how cool that would be to have the Notre Dame in the Big Ten conference?
Oh.
But do I see that happening? As long as they're winning games, which I think they will. They got a really good coach, old Buckeye Marcus Freeman.
Yeah.
It seems like there's a little bit more allure coming back. So I don't see that in the near future.
But I tell you what, with television, kind of as I call it, the tail wagging the dog anymore, you look at the potential matchups of Notre Dame, Ohio State, Michigan, right on down the line in the Big Ten starting next year. If you add Notre Dame, I mean, you got a colossal game almost every week you can put on the air, right? I mean, isn't it kind of what it's about, programming?
Yeah, but we all know that's not going to happen.
Yeah.
I think you can expect more Notre Dame, Middle Tennessee States than you will Notre Dame against the Wolverines, Buckeyes, and I'm worried the Trojans might get rid of that game.
Yeah.
I mean, because USC is going to have their hands full now in that Big Ten conference, and when I was at Florida in that daunting SEC schedule, we played at times, we played Florida State every year. And people kind of forgot that was, and then they'd say, why don't you play Miami? And I'm like, sure, we'd love to play Miami, but wait a minute, we have a job to do, and our job is to go in that conference.
Yeah.
And if you're playing Notre Dame, if you're playing Florida State and Miami, and then you're playing Alabama, Auburn, Georgia, Tennessee, and you look at some of these other teams in the country and who they're playing, you're like, wait a minute, what? Why? So that's all. Those are all conversations that, I just hope for the good of the game, these games stick around.
Okay, let's get to this game. The current, like I said, Ohio State's on a 5-game win streak against Notre Dame, including bowl games. Ohio State's a 3.5-point favorite at Notre Dame. Is that legit? I mean, what do you see there that just jumps out at you?
Well, I just got done watching 2 days of the video because we're going to do. Bob Stoops is going to join us on the set. Who I'm really close to Coach Stoops, and we're going to talk about the Notre Dame defense. And they are really good. They play really, really hard,
Yeah.
and they are blitz mania. So I think this is going to be a great game. I think Kyle McCord, this will be obviously how he's going to get hit, and how I'm going to watch closely how he handles that in that environment, because it's going to be loud. But Buckeyes get into that. One thing about Notre Dame Stadium, people find ways. Nebraska, Ohio State fans buy those tickets up. There'll be a bunch of scarlet and gray in that stadium, but this is going to be how he handles getting hit will be the difference in the game, because he will get hit. But he's also got the best player in America. So the whole concept of, if I'm that defense coordinator at Notre Dame, do I do it and risk, if that kid gets the ball in the hand of Marvin Harrison Jr., then the rest of the receiver room straight to it. It's over fast. So it's going to be, the chess match is going to be, we have to hit the quarterback, but do I leave Marvin Harrison Jr. and the other receivers on an island?
Hey, and real quick, before we move on, you've watched video, obviously a bunch of video. Are you impressed by what Ohio State has done defensively yet? Obviously, they played the team that led the nation in passing last week, and pretty much throttled. I mean, what's your impression? Go ahead.
No, not yet. When you play in Ohio State, they did play Indiana, but Indiana's not the same Indiana team they were a couple years ago.
Yeah.
I just watch them. They can't really throw it. They do some good run game stuff, but that's not the same. Coach Allen had that thing cooking a couple years ago. And Indiana's a tough job, but I take nothing out of when you play those games. It's a little bit like, tell me about the Wolverines, tell me about Georgia, tell me. At least Notre Dame went to NC State and played a decent team, and I can take something from there. But when you say no, I'll talk to you next week about Ohio State's defense. Up to now.
Yeah, this is a team that wants to line up and run it down your throat and then throw over the top. I mean, this is a classic challenge for this Ohio State defense. By the way, real quick, I'll never forget covering that game in '96 up there at Notre Dame Stadium. And after that game, Lou Holtz comes in to they had an interview tent set up because they were still finishing the expansion of that stadium. Remember, the upper deck still wasn't open but Lou looked like somebody had drained the blood from him. I mean, from his body when he came in, he was so ashen. And this is a huge game, isn't it, Urban? I mean, do you ever sleep on a week like this? Go ahead.
No, this is bigger than life. This is something that follows you around. This is something that I was on that staff, and I remember Coach Holtz. Coach Holtz coached for Woody Hayes. Yeah. He has a national championship ring for 1968. And, that was one of those games that I'll never forget. The opening kickoff, my gosh, I took it 98 yards to start the game. And I mean, you don't breathe for those 4 hours. And with Lou Holtz, I remember we had a staff meeting afterwards, and oh my gosh. I mean, I was a young coach that you just lost to Ohio State, and is the sun going to come up tomorrow? Are we all fired? Or, that's the impact of this game will live in infamy. I mean, this is going to be around for a long time. This does not go away.
Yeah. I was going to say, but you got vengeance yourself on Notre Dame in 2015 with that star-studded Ohio State team, which should have been in the playoff against a star-studded Notre Dame team, right? I mean, Ronnie Stanley and all those guys. That was a hell of a Fiesta Bowl matchup going in, wasn't it?
It was, and you remember Joey Bosa got thrown out.
Yeah.
I mean, he got hit with the crown of his helmet. It was the right call,
but Jalen Smith,
Jalen Smith got hurt.
Yeah,
he got a really serious injury right in front of me. I remember watching it, but it was almost, as someone who loves the game of football, who has my two favorite schools are always the Irish and the Buckeyes. It's almost surreal, and even when I would stand on the sideline of the rivalry game, it'd be like, are you really here?
Yeah.
Is that you're really coaching against the University of Notre Dame? Newt Rockne and Leahy and all the great players, and because I just studied that game, I lived it, you lived it, and you actually get a chance to do it, and then find a way to win that game. It was surreal.
And by the way, the other thing before we move on, the other thing stands out in modern times is there's a good chance now Joey Bosa, Zeke Elliott, Jalen Smith, Ronnie Stanley wouldn't even play in that game, right? If it wasn't a playoff game. I mean, times are changing, aren't they?
Yeah, they'll always play in that one though. I get the.
I'm talking about the Fiesta Bowl. Yeah.
That's reality, and that breaks your heart.
I mean, I wrote a story the day of that game going, it's hard to believe these guys are playing. And then boom, two of them are out of it before you know it. Alabama host number 15, Ole Miss. Which team is overrated right now? Number 13, Alabama, or number 15, Ole Miss? And I think we're going to find out, right?
We are, and I don't know. I watched because I was going to do something on Alabama, and I think I still might for the show. I don't get that one now. I mean, that was Alabama has got. I don't know what's going on there. I mean, that was the good thing. There's a lot of football left. I thought, the game that Texas beat them, they played better. This last game against South Florida, that was awful.
Yeah.
And I'm not just talking about quarterback play. That the offensive line and they couldn't run the ball, they couldn't throw the ball. It was bad, and I'm sure coach will get that going down there, and I can imagine those staff meetings right now aren't very pleasant, because if they play like that, now I'm not saying they will, but if they play like they did last week, there's gonna be some losses showing up here.
Well, he reinstalled Jalen Milroe as starting quarterback this week, which makes a lot of people wonder whether that was a benching last week from a disciplinary standpoint. You never ever like to speculate. I remember Bear Bryant benching Joe Namath, way back when, I think it was the 1963 season. And at the very end, because Alabama played at Miami a week after they played Auburn, which was really strange. And, Joe Willie, I guess, stayed out a little bit late in Miami Beach or something. But the point is, sometimes you have to discipline players, and you did this at Ohio State, with a few guys. I remember sometimes you have to discipline players. You don't necessarily want it in the public purview what's going on, but college coaches have a little bit still of that part in them too, right? Whether this is the case or not, but just you still have to run a team, right? From the standpoint of punishment, discipline, et cetera, right?
Sure. And I remember I got, even I'll hear people, well, and he never told the media, hey, listen, I could care less about the media.
Yeah.
I can speak on every coach that should. You have an obligation to that football team, your players, your athletic director, and that's about it. It stops. And then you have, former players, you have this, and then somewhere down the bottom of the list is some clown that's going to write something negative about you, and you want to, what happened to that player? Well, it's none of your business, because he's an 18, 19-year-old kid that you don't want to have some check mark by his name. I remember at Florida, I remember we had to suspend a couple of players because of marijuana use or something like that. And someone said, well, why didn't you, why doesn't he tell the media? I'm like, why would I tell? I mean, that's almost silly. Why would I tell you? That's between the player, his family, and trying to get this thing fixed. He's 19 years old. Move on to something else, pal.
Yeah.
So I get angry when I hear about that stuff.
Of course, we always figured out a way to find out anyway. You know what I mean? But no, I'm with you.
Well, you got a job to do, Tim, and so did the coach. But I got news. Who's more? Your job is dealing with the coach's job is dealing with a 19-year-old kid that's got a future and a life and a family.
Right.
You got to sell some papers.
Yeah.
Figure it out.
Yeah. But I just, personally, my point was always to give why is this guy not here today? Well, here's the reason this guy's not here today. You know what I mean? I mean, just answer that. And, those are opposing. Yeah.
Tim, you're wrong. You're wrong. You said give the answer. My answer is no.
Okay.
No, if it's going to hurt the player, are you nuts?
Yeah.
No, we do not have an obligation. We have an obligation. I told you. The obligation is to that player, the player's family, that university, your athletic director, and then that's it. You do not have an obligation if it's going to hurt that player.
Yeah, I got you. I was just talking about me, the conundrum I would be in those deals. But here's the thing: what always drove me crazy was when somebody would make a mistake, and there were mistakes. Players make mistakes. They're 18 to 24 years old in the case of Sam Hartman. But you make mistakes. And what drove me nuts is the reason I didn't like to make a big deal about something unless it was serious was the people calling for somebody to get kicked off the team. You know what I mean? I said, well, so, okay, you don't want him to play football anymore, but you want him to go to McDonald's and work. I mean, go figure. But anyway, hey, 24 Iowa at number 7 Penn State. This is a game kind of going under the radar. I know it's not going under your radar. You like Penn State. I think you probably like Iowa a little bit. They've got a quarterback actually can throw it from here to there. What's just your take on this game? This is an early harbinger game for the Big Ten.
This is huge game, and you're right. There's so many other big games that this is a monster game. I think Iowa's the team to beat in the West. I think they got the best defense coordinator in college football. I think they're tough, they're rugged. You know how I feel about Coach Ferentz, and that I've always admired them, and it's arguably the most consistent. I know offensively they've been a mess the last couple of years, but they still find ways to win. So this is going to be Penn State better be ready, because Iowa finds a way at the end. You know what's going to happen in the fourth quarter. You're going to look up and it's going to be a 4-point game. And I really like Penn State. Something happened last week. Penn State did not look very good. I went back and watched videotape. They're so talented. This is the best Penn State talent team I've seen in 15 years. But those two running backs are phenomenal. This is good. This is a monster game. It's a whiteout game, and we've been to some of those whiteout games. I think that's the most difficult environment in college football. Those fans and students do a great job there. So this is a huge game.
All right. I agree with you 100%. The whiteout thing is unique in college football. Last thing, we'll get to this little feature we started last year and stuff. I really like it, but the checkmate moment for me, because everybody stayed up and watched that game the other night, watching Coach Prime in prime time. Actually, it was post prime time by the time that thing got over on the East Coast and stuff. But that you touched on it earlier, that 98-yard drive, man, Shedeur Sanders engineered, took them down the field, made some plays, pulled some plays out of I call it his back pocket, and they get it to overtime. That was impressive. Like you just mentioned earlier, that shows you the talent of a team, but also the heart of a team, doesn't it? That they didn't give up. And after they came back, after they came back and got to overtime, I went, Colorado State, you had your shot. It's not going to work out this time. What's your take?
That was the defining moment so far of the year for them. I know they beat TCU, but who's the second game? Oh, Nebraska.
Yeah.
We've been there every time, so we should know this. But to do that without his best player, Travis Hunter, to do that when your back's against the wall, fairly, a new roster that's only been together a month. Yeah, that was one of the most impressive moments of the year. And the defining moment to me is when he reset his feet and hit that fade down the left sideline in the whole shot. And just phenomenal. So I can't say enough about Shedeur Sanders. I was very skeptical when I first started thinking about this, Jackson State to the big time college football or to a Power 5 team. And then I went out watching him practice. And I sat down actually at breakfast where he was right there, and we talked a little bit, and I listened to him interact. He's very smart. He's poised beyond his age, and that was the defining moment for him. And that was a lot more to come. Yeah.
Well, you're going to be back out there next week, man. It could be a Heisman showdown, Shedeur Sanders versus Caleb Williams.
You're right.
I'd pay to go to that game. And but it is a phenomenon happening in college football, and you're right in the middle of it, Urban. It's kind of cool, isn't it? Otherwise, you'd be getting ready to go play somebody. You understand what I'm saying? What?
We can't wait. It's so good to Boulder is such a beautiful place. There's nice history there. In 1990, that was the Mecca with Bill McCartney and those great players they had. But it's just become like a second home. This will be our third time out there. And the student body's fantastic.
Yeah. I've only been there one time, 1985, when Ohio State played out there. Keith Byers was hurt and all this kind of stuff, and Ohio State eked out a win. But what a beautiful campus. And, that is a college football program with more tradition than some people think. Because I remember when Bill Mallory was there in the 1970s, and they played Ohio State in the Orange Bowl. They've had some success, like you pointed out, and they've rekindled it. But hey, Urban, appreciate it, man. Enjoyed this conversation once again. Urban State, we'll hit them again next week, right?
Look forward to it, Tim. Thanks.